You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a podcast that centers on disability with the hopes of uplifting, informing, and bringing together disabled people and their allies. If you'd like to join Dana in the conversation, head to the description to check out our link tree and find us on Instagram at DANA at Sac State. Hashtag Where's the Ramp? Hashtag We're Good at Podcasting. Hello, everybody who's here, which is a lot of people, and everybody who's watching later, which is everyone else. My name is Willian Wyatt. This is the podcast-ish thing Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance. And today is the crossover episode. It's not a joke from BoJack Horseman. It is the actual crossover episode with Through Our Lens and Shock and Autism, which is its own presence here on YouTube and on other platforms, everywhere podcasts are found. Here today we have, from Shock and Autism specifically, Dylan and Daniel. And we also have the founder of Dana, Rian, and a member of Dana, formerly, Keelan, all of whom are here today to talk to us about autism, basically. We haven't done an episode specifically focused on autism here at the Disabled Non-Disabled Alliance, or we have, but in not specifically with a number of people who have that experience from ordinary life and have their own sort of takes on it, their own connections to make. So yeah, we're here to I'm here at least to cultivate and propagate those opinions, which is part of the project, as I see it, of the getting more disabled discourse out there. And hence the crossover episode featuring Shock and Autism, hence the having everything that Through Our Lens and the Disabled Non-Disabled Alliance has been doing since its inception. Okay, so that's the topic for today, basically autism, what it means, what it's like to live on the spectrum, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have that personal experience, so I don't even know how to narrow down the field properly. But the first thing that I want to mention for those who are watching is, as most of you, I suspect, will know, that at the time of recording, which is the Friday before the episode goes out, the Supreme Court has recently levied two, as I see it, strictly legislative decisions, one of which involves your Miranda rights, the other of which involves abortion access. The more famous of the two is the one regarding abortion access. Both I see are very important to sort of get a grip on. I have my own takes on this. I think we all do, and we all should. But the point that I want to stress right here and right now, out of the context with which we're sort of explicitly talking about it, is that it is more important now than I think it has ever been, although we've always been this structurally messed up, to take part in the democratic process. And by the democratic process, I mean things like the discourse. I mean not more than voting, but also protesting. There are events going on in Sacramento right now, and way more outside the actual Supreme Court. I've seen the photos. So yeah, what I'm going to recommend to everybody, and my co-hosts for today will have their own takes, and I encourage them to give them. But what I'm going to encourage people to do is just to look up the actual sort of Supreme Court decisions, which are with regard to abortion access, abortion rights, the rescindation thereof, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, and regarding Miranda rights, Vega versus Tekoh, Tekoh. So that's what I'm going to recommend ahead of the main thrust of this episode, which is not about either of those decisions, because we only basically heard about them today, although they could have been predicted, is to go ahead and look up those decisions, look up the fallout from those decisions. One of the things to really keep an eye on is what the specifics, like conservative justices who levied that decision, who wrote the majority opinion, want to do in the future, because a number of them have explicitly said they want to continue rolling back protections, continue addressing former, somewhat emancipatory Supreme Court legislation.
which includes Oberfell versus Hodges, the one that gave the ability to legalize gay marriage, I believe, if that's correct.
Yes, that was not the only one mentioned, but it was definitely one mentioned, I believe, by Clarence Thomas, one of the longest-standing Supreme Court justices on the conservative side. Yeah, so sorry to go on forever. We definitely could, maybe we should, but like this is the episode about autism and about living with it, etc., etc. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to my esteemed co-hosts and featured guests to begin us on the journey today. I have never felt more intensely that specifically I am not good enough. Like I have not been doing enough to prevent this kind of thing from happening or to properly restructure the system such that it doesn't. Anyway, please, anybody go ahead.
William, your ability to end a sentence is ever present.
All right.
Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished viewers of non-binary gender, I am Daniel of Shock and Autism, and thank you for having us today. And just briefly on the things William mentioned there, I don't know, did you vote Democrat in 2016? I mean, like, really, that's where this was. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity for them to influence the court for a generation, and they won. What are you gonna do? It's terrible. But moving on, unless other people have other things to say with it, but they have good things. Life on the spectrum it's really, you're gonna one of the oldest jokes in the book is that, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one, because while there are commonalities and sort of general themes of, having a niche interest, the eye contact, the somewhat at times kind of robotic voice, the sort of indefinable weirdness, for lack of a better way to put it, it is a spectrum, and it's a wide variety of behavior. And I, just to sort of get heavy with it a little bit, I feel sort of particularly unqualified after a fashion, not because I'm not on the spectrum, I am, but because like I actively, like, from the time I was, sort of diagnosed or like this brought into my attention when I was having some behavioral problems in school, my junior year in school, like actively targeted visibly autistic behavior for erasure, to the point where a former friend, his mom told me, it's like, yeah, it's just like, if it weren't for your voice, I couldn't tell. And this was many years ago. Now, I think there are other things beside my voice that give it away, the general cadence, and again, eye contact thing is really in there. And so, like, and it really, like, wasn't some like deep, like, oh, I have to sort of eradicate. It wasn't. I don't even think I was like really aware that I was doing it until college, when it's just like, well, I would like my classmates to hate me less than they do, and I can tell that they do. So I'm going to sort of target the things that sort of make me a little more difficult to deal with, and that's a shame. Not because, like, hey, like, figuring out how to, get along easier with people is bad. It's probably pretty good. I undoubtedly made some friends, or some stronger friends, through being able to work on connecting a little more. But sort of the reasoning for it, it's a little unfortunate. And in that respect, I don't want to say I feel like a fraudulent autistic person, but like I definitely am glad that I'm just like, yeah, we're gonna have Daniel on here and he's gonna talk about the Autism Spectrum. It's like, no, we need way more than Daniel. And to that end, I turn the time over to anyone else.
I just wanted to mention the whole thing with like that sounds like we're going on the topic of like masking and stuff.
Yeah.
And growing up, I'm one of those people that didn't find out I was autistic until like last year. Funnily enough, I call her my ex-mom because she's just oof. But she basically dropped the news that, oh, by the way, your entire life we've thought that you were autistic and we got you tested over and over and over again for it. The day before I got fired from my first job. The day before.
Wow.
And funnily enough, I'm convinced that it was due to not having the right, like if I had known, I probably wouldn't have gotten fired. I probably would have gotten the proper accommodations and stuff like that. One of those people where I don't know if it's also just because I also have ADHD and it's just a weird mix, or if it's just masking that I just never figured out that's what I was doing. But I'm one of those people where I get met with, oh, you don't look autistic. And I just like it. You hear that over and over and over again of that being a response for people who, like, for some people who are on the autism spectrum, but you never get prepared for the first time someone tells you that. Like, you can think of all of these responses of like, oh, well, what does an autistic person look like? Until you suddenly get hit with it. And I'm just like, how am I supposed to respond to this? What the fuck? Just, but I don't even know where I was going with this. I just thought I'd share that experience in terms of, I guess, masking and stuff.
Yeah. From what I gather, that is like an integral or very common part of the experience of being on the spectrum.
I wanna jump back in and then over to you Dylan, because this point is quick. Masking is the term, but I always I've never been sort of terribly fond of it, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it necessarily, because like I don't even know that it's in all cases it's like, oh, we're just putting a mask over everything. We're learning how to act normal. It's like in some cases, but like in some cases it's sort of kind of a much more like long-term sort of project or whatever that in some ways is sort of forced on you, and in some ways is, you know, not like I am significantly more pro ABA than like most any other person on the autism spectrum that I've met. But
real quick, for those not in the know, what's ABA?
Applied behavior analysis, behaviorism, as a way of a therapy for people on the autism spectrum. But like, even as I am sort of pro that for various reasons, I'm a former psych major that undoubtedly biases things, and had a really good professor who was an ABA therapist, and really good classmates who do stuff. Like, when ABA is bad, it's not just theoretically giving your child or the autistic person the tools to mask if they want to. It is telling them to mask. And that's the shame of it. That's when things go really, really bad. You want to give someone the tools needed to like survive in the hellscape of life. That's good. You want to tell them, no, this is what you do. That's not. Now I will shut up and go to Dylan.
No worries. Hi, I am Dylan, also of Shock and Autism, and I learned at a very, very, I don't remember, I want to say around almost a little over 10 years old, I found I was diagnosed autistic. But the thing is, that became just kind of the normal, that turned into my normal. Like, I don't really feel, if there is a way to feel autistic, I'm not sure if I truly feel that way. I mean, yeah, I went to speech therapy or just general communication therapy for a number of years to kind of get the idea of, eye contact, just drill that into you, just get that kind of like sustained eye contact going down. And yeah, and to a degree that also kind of backfired after a while, because then I would stare too much and it's like, oh, got to back off a bit. But yeah, that's something my most of my issues, whether they're autistic or not, deal in communication. Most of my issues revolve around education. I don't know how much of it I don't know how much of it to tie possibly back into autism or not, but I just know I am very awkward. So that's kind of that's kind of where I feel it the most, is just communicating and not communicating as smoothly as I would like with all the, as Daniel will point out, and I'll point out myself when I'm editing all the audio for our podcast, the ums and ahs and stutters and all that kind of stuff. Beyond that, it's really just a lot of pacing and stimming. Like, that's all I can honestly say. That's the majority of my experience with my most autistic tendencies, I guess you'd call it. Just a lot of pacing, and I love fidget spinners. Way too common to say that, but I freaking love fidget spinners. That's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
The reason that we're sort of, that people are like taught to do either ABA or masking is because there's certain expectations that are part of the sort of practical landscape that you have to navigate, regardless of who you are, that become more difficult for somebody on the autism spectrum, is, if I gather correctly. And so there's this like conceptual difference that comes up between that which is like appropriate applied behavior analysis and that which is like just straight up pejorative, masking teaching. And that's an interesting difference, because it's both. It's like I wonder how much of it is a function of the of the factors of practical realities, and how much of it is genuine like bigotry against autistic folks, just at the level of thinking that this is a either ABA or masking, the conformity thereof is a thing you have to do at all. Because at the end of the day, we have to, the necessity of these things as it stands like comes from the fact that the world just isn't designed to make sense to people who are on the spectrum, right? Kind of, you would expect that even in a perfect world to some degree, but it's rather overt, as I understand, for folks in the autism spectrum. I guess like the analogous thing for me would be coming from a visual disability that I've had since, for my entire life. That has been pretty hard to understand for people and pretty pervasive as far as the things that it limits and stuff. For one thing, I noticed, like, watching these podcasts back occasionally, is that I almost never look at the camera. Like, I know I'm doing that, but it's really obvious that I'm doing that because people in other kinds of other content look at the camera. Likewise, you might have noticed I almost never make eye contact. And that probably reads as like a weird thing I'm doing, like a being distracted, microaggressions, etc. And I suspect something similar is true for people who like are on the spectrum, but maybe aren't so obviously on the spectrum. Like, if you've met one autistic person, you met one, right? What that means probably in practice is that a lot of folks don't have a very clear way of, predicting in advance that they will find out that somebody is like on the spectrum. And we can talk about as well, like diagnoses and stuff. But as far as masking goes, I think my personal sort of takeaway is that it's like masking or ABA, the practice of like trying to, as either as the individual or as the individual teaching the individual to sort of conform to societal expectations in order to better get money, basically, in order to better make one's way through these systems that we have. My takeaway is that all of that is sort of part of a grander scheme by which we have failed to like universally design society in some ways. Like our social technology is just not adjustable in the right way for people on the spectrum to communicate successfully without having to go through lots and lots of procedure beforehand.
I've
And and I just had some of my own experiences anyway. Sorry,
I've
go ahead.
honestly found that in environments where there are more autistic people and therefore the social rules have been rewritten to be more accessible, I've found that it's so much easier to talk in those environments because I don't have to overthink it, you know? I don't know if I'm autistic. That's something I'm currently trying to find out, but apparently the process is like super complicated because um my therapist says that I have anxiety and depression, but I don't know if she's actually diagnosed me with that or not. So I need to find that out from her later today. And I need to go back to Kaiser and tell them, I either have or have not been diagnosed with these things, but either way, I've expressed that I struggle with these things. So they need to rule out the possibility of those things. And then only then can I get tested for autism. So, like, I don't, I don't know. But my whole relationship to that entire realm of human being, that facet of being human is really like a gray area for me because I've found myself surrounded by autistic people completely by accident, and I don't know what that means for me, but it has been interesting because I kind of pick up on their thoughts about being autistic and what that means for them and how that affects how they view the world and how they communicate with other people. um and I gotta say, I'd rather hang out with autistic people any day than a bunch of neurotypicals. No offense, but like, it's just there's there seems, when you know that the group you're with is similar to you, it just seems easier to communicate because then you kind of have that baseline for what sort of expectations or lack thereof that you should have. And I'm the type of person that like overthinks everything. If you set a bunch of rules in front of me, I will read through every single rule and like build it into what I'm doing because I'm a rule follower. I want to follow the rules. I don't want to like step on any toes. So I'm going to read through every single rule. I will ask clarifying questions, and then I will follow all those rules to the best of my ability. And then with autistic people, when I'm hanging out with my autistic friends, it's just I can relax, because I know I can be as I can just speak the way I normally do. And I know that if I say anything confusing or upsetting, they will let me know and I will adjust my behavior because now I know. Right. But when I'm hanging out with neurotypical people, they don't communicate. They don't tell you when something upsets them. They get all like secretive and are like, yeah. And in reality, they mean, what the fuck did you just say? Did you just say that to my face? Did you say that? Yeah, I'd rather have somebody say, did you just say that to my face? Than be like, yeah, like, because it's so much less confusing, and and that's why I think, we should focus more on like making our social and, societal landscapes more accessible, because it's just easier for everybody. I don't know why it's so complicated in the first place. So that's my 2 cents.
I have an idea, but I'd be curious to see what other people's takes on it are.
Okay.
I just want to say, Rian, I almost fully, completely sympathize with you on that. Like out in the world with a bunch of going to community college, for instance, I would try to socialize with people, but I would overthink everything. Like it would be like I'm worried, what are they going to think if I say this? I shouldn't say that. Then should I say this? No, what if they take it this way? And then by that time, all the opportunities have passed. There's no point. Yeah. Whereas little peek behind the curtain here, I co-host Not the podcast. I mean, I co-host that too, but I mean, for on Zoom, I co-host a number of support groups for people on the spectrum, and I really comfortably fit into that. Like I like communicating with other people on the spectrum and helping bring them out socially and just talking. That's much more my wheelhouse. So I'm just saying, like, I fully understand where you're coming from. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention something that I graduated with a bachelor's in American Sign Language and Deaf Studies, and one thing that I noticed is that the deaf community, the culturally deaf community, tends to be blunt, so blunt. And the reason for this is that communication is really valued in the deaf community, especially because you will have, for one, most deaf people are born to hearing parents. And a lot of times what happens is like they'll be sitting at the dinner table, hearing people will laugh at like some joke and they won't catch it. They're like, oh, what's going on? Oh, I'll tell you later. Oh, you don't need to know. Oh, it's not important. And there's a lot of lack of communication that can happen with the deaf community. And I found that I think also me being autistic explains a lot as to why I kind of just fell in love with the deaf community during my time in school. And it's just, there was something else that I was going to mention. Oh, right. To kind of take from a similar experience from, I think, a lot of deaf people. What was it? Oh, yeah. The burden of communication is often placed upon deaf people. You have a lot of deaf people who are either pressured to or forced to do speech therapy, get hearing aids, get cochlear implants, etc. Meanwhile, a lot of hearing people are like, oh, I know a little bit of sign language, or like, oh, I want to learn it. Or I've had deaf friends who grew up being told, you are in a hearing world. You have to, the burden of communication is on you. The thing is with that, in order for deaf people to do stuff like speech therapy, takes years and years and years and years of grueling like therapy. And a lot of times, some people have described growing up as like, I lost my childhood. My parent was a teacher instead of a parent, or like just and I think it might be getting a little bit better, but it kind of reminds me of the conversation surrounding how a lot of times the burden of communication are also on autistic people. Neurotypical people don't seem to try a whole lot to see where we're coming from. Like, for example, something as simple as tone indicators, like /s for sarcasm. I find that a lot of autistic people and also deaf people and also just the disabled community in general, we kind of just get it. And I find that those communities, just accessibility is kind of just a no-brainer. And I love that it's kind of almost instinctual to be accommodating, like to use tone indicators or to be more blunt. Whereas with a lot of neurotypical people, like what Rian mentioned, a lot of like, they just expect you to get like subtext, or just, I can't even like think of examples, but I think hopefully that that kind of parallel between other communities hopefully makes sense in what I'm trying to explain.
And I think that kind of calls back to the root cause of this all being the expectation for marginalized people to conform rather than the society itself to be more welcoming. Because then it's no wonder that so many communities have such similar stories and experiences paralleling each other despite having like completely different reasons for being marginalized. Like being deaf is definitely not the same as being autistic, but at the
Yeah.
same time, when you look at how it's like growing up being like that, there are so many similarities, and it's all because you're being forced to conform with something that is just almost impossible for you to conform to, while everybody else around you isn't making the effort to understand you.
Or
Um,
it's
yeah.
like having to sort of bare your soul to sort of get the bare minimum. Like, here is my deep trauma. This is why I deserve this relatively minimal, understanding or accommodation is common amongst all marginalized people.
Yeah,
Here's
God.
this eptalk. Here's this like cyst that grew ever, and this is why I need a abortion. Here is this problem that I've had with the police. Here is my husband. We are a gay couple. Why is our love different than yours? Here's all the things we've struggled and help each other with. Please see our humanity. Like, it's all sort of in the same sort of commonalities of just having to bear your soul into things. I have a sort of different direction to sort of throw things out there with, and this might bring you back into the picture a little here, William, because we gotta bring in the neurotypical person.
It's always a mistake.
The purpose of
All about inclusion, right?
of this.
We've discussed
but,
this. I have the anxiety. I have a similar anxiety to where Rian does, but I'm not like in the medical process for it. I don't know what's visual impairment and what could be like some version of getting built different neurologically.
Yep.
No idea.
But the thought that I sort of had, and that I'd love to sort of get, I mean, like William's thoughts, but also the thoughts of non-philosophy majors is because within the field of biomedical ethics, there's amongst the whole bunch of debates, there could be is something basically akin to the effect of like, okay, we know that if you are born deaf or if you are born blind, that there's going to be challenges in this world. We ain't a terribly accommodating world. Is it ethical for a deaf parent or a blind parent if you could, if gene technology in the future advances far enough along to where you could guarantee that your child would be born deaf or guarantee that your child will be born blind? Is that ethical to give them something that is it is culturally you, but will so severely disadvantage them? And tying this back in, you could ask the same question of autism. And I'd love to hear some thoughts.
That's an interesting question. I've never heard that question before. I've heard the opposite, and my response to that is that's eugenics, but I've never heard that question before, so I'm gonna have to think about that.
Yeah. That's definitely okay.
Ooh.
I'm gonna skip 10,000 words here and say probably probably not, but for an interesting reason. And I'm going to say like two points about that immediately crop up in my head. Okay, so in general, I think it is useful always to have more like capability to one's body, more like sensory information available, like how we understand these things is very societally couched, and there are good reasons why how we understand things like blindness and autism ought to be societally couched. But we should, I think it's still useful to say that we should always try to, where there aren't overriding considerations, and often there are, increase the amount of information any given person has to work with, increase the amount of stuff any given person is able to do. Again, there are mitigating factors to that, right? There's other things to consider. But ultimately to the effect that I kind of come down on the side of, no, it wouldn't be ethical. You could give that person a choice. I'm kind of using like Lockean liberalism here, but like it makes a lot of sense to, give the child a choice to lose that sense like later in life or to become whatever. But that's different. That has the, cascading effect of having like grown up with a particular like ability or like neurotypicality and then losing it is a very different experience from growing up with it. So it's not the same thing achieved by different means. It's a broadly different thing. So yeah, if it were the case that we had that capability, I would say not to incorporate it into the framework. But what we could say, like, why we could examine, like, why would a parent want to do that in the first place? What is it? What is it the hope to achieve? It's not the deafness in and of itself. It's not the autism in and of itself. It's the cultural experience around that. So one way to view it is like the parent in that situation would be trying to conform
gotta
the
push
child
back
to
on
the
that a
culture.
little, actually. I'm sorry to interrupt, William, but I gotta push back on that a little bit. Now, I discussed before the podcast went on about how my studies of sign language have not been immediately intuitive and easy to grasp, but like when you refer to deaf people, that's what the capital D, it's not just a lack of hearing. It is a culture thing, but like it is like not being able to hear, like it is an identity feature that is a part of them, and it is a part of that. So it's not it's it is the culture thing, but there is an identity feature that is linked in with this lack of particular ability or sensory input. So I would push back on the notion that it's not really about that. It's like that's involved.
Sure. Even still, like the sort of the cultural component here would be something along the lines of like it still seems like it would be sort of conforming the child's body to like cultural expectations. We take it into like a fantasy setting, and we imagine that a kid sort of gets born with some kind of magical powers or augmentation or whatever, something that seems like a straightforward increase of like, I don't know, bodily capacity or something, some way of cashing that out. We would not then say it would be ethical to like remove that characteristic from the child. We could still raise the kid in sort of a situation that doesn't rely on them having that capability. Like you can if you are a deaf parent, you can raise a kid with sort of deaf culture and using sign language and all that stuff. If you are an autistic parent, you can do a lot of interesting things. I imagine you can. I think with any disability, there's an inherent break from the hegemony that we generally, that like people without disabilities and who are also occupy other like privileged intersections as being like, you know, white, cisgender, etc. Take for granted and will then, you know, teach their kids. Whereas if you are a disabled parent or an autistic parent, whatever, it's you grow up in a particular in a situation where you have broken from the hegemony. I think this is part of why communication gets so much easier. There's so much that neurotypical people sort of assume is true, and they're taught to assume that just tacitly. Like it's not even a conceptual connection here. It's just an implicit sort of bias, I don't think. And what that means is you can like raise a, you know, neurotypical child as an autistic parent and achieve like, I don't know, something along the lines of like the right culture or the right like cultural experience or the right conceptual development, etc., by way of teaching what you have learned as an autistic person, as opposed to, you know, at some point pre-gestation making the kid autistic. Basically I imagine that a lot of the good that comes out of like disability, and there's a lot of it, doesn't come from the disability itself. It comes from the things we do, the particular social situation in which disability happens, and part of that picture is being marginalized. But part of that picture is also like finding other marginalized people and breaking from the sort of societal norms in particular ways. Basically, I come down on the side of no, because in general it seems, I mean, for the same reason that I wouldn't want to, that I would say it would be wrong to make a genetically, like a, you know, someone genetically disposed to something like autism or Down syndrome or whatever, not that at some point pre-gestation.
I'd love you can achieve for someone to jump in, and then I sort of have a counter to this this sort of thing. But Keelan or Dillon or both or whoever.
I wanted to mention something. I made a mental note to myself in the chat a little bit ago, but talking about kind of off topic for a second, but I guess we could probably figure out a way to tie this in terms of stigma and the autism spectrum and stuff. I've heard a lot of stories about people not getting diagnosed after spending like thousands and thousands of dollars for the BS reason of like, oh, well, like, what about the stigma, right? Like, I'm like, oh, you're clearly autistic, but I'm not gonna put it down in an official diagnosis because of the stigma, as if getting a diagnosis is the thing that gives you the stigma, as if like having it not down on paper magically takes away the stigma. And I mentioned before, I only found out that I was autistic recently, and I had to do a lot of soul searching to be like, holy fuck, they're right. Like all of a sudden everything makes sense. I was the kid who teachers would tell my parents, hey, I think your kid is on the spectrum. I would get bullied for it. I grew up with a lot of like social stuff. And the weird thing is, whenever I got tested for it, what at least according to my mom, she'd say that like, oh, it's just the Crohn's disease. It's the Crohn's, that's why they're not paying attention in class. That's why, like, right, as if the autoimmune disease that affects my digestive system makes it so that I don't understand sarcasm, right? As if the Crohn's disease makes it so that I'm socially awkward to the point of bullying. Like, yeah, I was teased for my height and stuff, which, Crohn's disease does affect because it affects your ability to take in nutrients, but like pretty much all of the bullying that I experienced was social. It was specifically social. I think like talking about like the stigma and how like just whether or not it's on paper, it doesn't make the stigma go away, which I think also kind of gets into the topic of self-diagnosis.
Before you administer your counter real quick, I just want to put out there that my personal philosophy about becoming a parent is that when you decide to become a parent, regardless of whether you're adopting or giving birth, you're signing up for every single possible outcome. You're signing up for a stillborn kid. You're signing up for an autistic kid. You're signing up for a neurotypical kid. You're signing up for a deaf kid, for a hearing kid, for a kid who can't walk, a kid who has a muscle disease. You're signing up for a gay kid, a Black kid, an Asian kid. Like, it doesn't matter what you want going into parenting, because you're going to end up with a kid that you're not entirely prepared for. And I don't think it's possible to be fully prepared for every scenario ever, but you will be taken by surprise at some point, and you need to be able to take that in stride instead of trying to fix the kid into what you wanted for your parenting experience. And given that that's my philosophy, my answer to the question of morality about, in utero gene shit, making the kid what you want it to be, my stance on that will always be that it's bad no matter what the outcome is, because this is your kid. This is your kid. If you find out that they're not going to be what you expected or what you wanted, I don't think it's your right to go in there and try to fix it before they're even born. I think you should allow them to live their life and give them the support they need to guide them to being a better person and bloom into their own, individual being. And I don't think it is moral to take a kid and make them disabled before they're even born, not because being disabled is a bad thing, but more because that isn't who they are. That wasn't who they are when they were developing in the womb, and trying to take control of how your kid develops like that on a fundamental level, that's, I think, taking control on that level, I think that's the part that's immoral, and it doesn't matter if it's going one way or the other. But Daniel, you had a counterpoint. You go ahead.
I did, but I want to hear Dillon chime in on my conundrum, because I'm training Dillon to be an amateur philosopher like me.
Oh yes, with D's crates, right? I love that guy. Anyway, but
He's already got
D's crates, yeah.
He's nuts, Dillon.
D's nuts indeed, Daniel. But honestly, I would have to agree with Rian and Keelan, because the only thing I would add on to it, as someone who's like an aspiring science fiction writer, this the whole idea of, like, I think the word is designer babies, like
I was
that
gonna
whole-
mention that.
yeah, like that there is something, I mean, maybe I don't have like the intellectual or philosophical kind of brain to pinpoint exactly what, but something seems a little bit wrong about that, just like what you were saying, Rian, just letting them develop into who they are, that it seems like you are kind of cheating them out of that. And and on top of that, like, imagine, I mean, this is kind of beside the point, but imagine how boring the world would be if everyone was this perfect 6'2" muscular, that I don't want a population of Kens, that would just, or whatever the word would be, Kyles, I don't know. But I just
Chads.
like, Chads, there we go. Yes.
Kyles.
Yeah,
That's really good. I'm gonna use that.
I have a cousin named Kyle. I'm sure he'd take that in stride. Just but yeah, I there is definitely something that seems, and I apologize ahead of time for not being able to pinpoint exactly what, but I definitely find it to be bare minimum murky as hell, in term morally, that's my takeaway.
No, and you're right to note the science fiction component to this. I believe I have watched Gattaca in 2 different philosophy classes. So you are right to note that connection. But
That movie fucked me up, man. It fucked me
Remind
up
me
on
what
so
that-
many
remind me
levels,
what that
watching
movie
that in
was?
biology like 3 separate times.
What? It sounds familiar. Remind me of the premise.
Oh, basically, oh god, there's like so many layers to it. Basically, you're living in a future where they've like unlocked DNA gene technology, and you can literally like put together like the perfect embryo, and you've got options, and then you can impregnate yourself with the embryo that you want, and they'll like have a list of like all the different things the embryo has the potential for, would have the genetic advantage for, like a sports athlete or being super smart. And basically what that leads to is from conception, people are kind of sent down these paths, and you never find people who are in an occupation that they haven't been prepared for since conception. But the story revolves around this one guy who was conceived just kind of on the verge of this technology becoming more and more widespread, and he was conceived normally. He's a completely normal dude.
I feel like I've seen this
And
years
his
ago.
brother was conceived to be like super smart and sportsy and stuff. He was a designer. His younger brother was like a designer baby. Or was he his older brother? I don't know. Either way, that leads to a very intense rivalry between the two, in which his brother almost dies in crossing the ocean or something stupid and masculine like that. But basically what happens is that the guy who's normal really, really wants to go to space. He wants to be an astronaut, but he wasn't given the genes to do that. And so he teams up with a man who was given the genes to do that, but had an accident and became a wheelchair user because of it, and he teams up with that guy to basically impersonate him and use his identity to get into the space program.
I have
Running
seen this
into
movie. I have seen this
designer
movie.
babies like
And
as
it ends with the guy in the wheelchair killing himself in a fire chamber.
Oh, I
And,
remember
you know,
that scene.
I was using a wheelchair by the time I first saw that movie, and that affected me. But
Oh, no.
but the guy does make it to space, so good for
yeah.
him, I guess. But like, it's got like
I remember
several
that
other
movie.
different subplots going on as well. But basically, it's focusing on like what would society look like in a world of designer babies, where very few people are just normal, and how would those normal people experience and navigate through that society. It's
because they're
questionable,
effectively
but
disabled by
it does explore the question. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's also a classism component because it's getting more widespread, but there's still the poor, and the poor can't afford it, and all their
oh yeah.
No, absolutely.
all their
Has to-
stuff.
has to hold
So
into
there's capitalism in there for you, William.
Thank you.
But to sort of my counter, because I'm getting the general notion of like, no, this would not be okay. I mentioned identity features, and if the argument is something along the lines of like, no, that would not be okay to actively give your child some natural features that would make them disadvantageous, or to actively, like, if it's sort of like in the way it's going, to sort of like actively make sure it stays that way, to give them identity features or some natural features that would be disadvantageous to them. By that token, we would also have to say that a Black couple could not actively make their child Black, because I don't think any of us, based on this conversation, would argue that being Black is advantageous in the world, certainly not this country. And that's a problem, because I think like intuitively we want to say like, yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I actually think for, these, again, culturally deaf and things of that nature, there's a blind culture and stuff. I think by that notion, you have to say yes, sort of on those grounds. And I mean, to say nothing on the sort of like utilitarian grounds of like, it would be sort of like a really, really like less rich world if everyone looked exactly the same and everyone was this designer baby, and we don't actually learn to overcome and any of these things in that nature. But yeah, that's the difficulty of it, is because by analogy you wind up with a situation where you gotta make every baby white.
And the worst part about that analogy, not that your analogy is bad, but more the point being is that the reason why the reaction might be so visceral to that is because that's literally already happened. There's already been like eugenics against Black people. There's already been attempts to prevent Black people from having babies to make sure that there are less Black people. Like that's already happened, and it's ongoing. Like that's a very established event in our nation's history, and also probably worldwide history. So that's like we don't want to tell people that they cannot have children that look or are like them, because that's a very slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope, and that's why my stance is literally just don't control it either way. Like, what's gonna happen is gonna happen, right? Don't start regulating how people can have children.
So if I'm sort of understanding your points correctly, if I'm wrong, like your stance is essentially like, if you see, if like basically it's sort of like an ethics of science type of a thing. It's like, hey, scientists, if you see that you're sort of getting close to that technology, burn it to the ground. Do not cross over that line. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Like, I pretty much, because I'm not against in utero testing fully. I think there are some things we should just not touch with that. I'm not against testing like that in fully, because I do believe it can help parents prepare ahead of time for what can happen, not in terms of should we get an abortion or not, but more in terms of like, okay, what's the game plan? How are we going to help raise this child so that they are happy and healthy, right? But unfortunately, when it comes to like testing for things like Down syndrome and people are like, oh, so abortion, and no, that is not the point. But I'm not against testing fully, but I am against like modifying embryos in utero, because it's like we just should not be touching that at all. Like that is not a place that science should go. I really don't think that's a place we should go. And one would argue that maybe we should at least allow people the option so every person can decide for themselves. But that's the thing. People are really attracted to rolling with whatever seems popular. Not everybody. I mean, I'm kind of immune to that, but I've noticed that a lot of people, when something starts trending, they just hop right on and they don't really think it through fully. And so if designer babies become popular, then everybody's gonna hop on that train. And you can't really stop that unless you just prevent the technology from becoming widespread in the first place. And I really don't think rich people should be allowed that either, because that's you're gonna fuck up your kid's childhood so badly. Like, imagine telling them to their face that, like, we would not have accepted you as a child if we weren't able to modify your genetics to fit what we want from you, because you're our perfect little doll child that's gonna sit on the shelf and be perfect, right?
Fuck. Okay. So, I mentioned the whole like me not having a good relationship with my parents thing, and the reason for that is like there are always going to be parents who will try to mold their children into what they want. And I've been through the whole being infantilized thing. I've gone through the whole like you're not allowed to be an adult. You have to be like this, what Rian said, this perfect little doll that sits on a shelf. And then all of a sudden, when I start being an adult, when I, have a partner, when I move out, they freak out. Like what happened? What happened to our little, perfect being? Oh, how dare you have an opinion other than, what we tell you? So of course you're going to have parents that are going to take advantage of that technology, and not only will parents psychologically and mentally try to mold their children like what but like what Rian said, imagine being told, hey, not only do we expect you to be exactly like us mentally, but we've basically tried to predestine you into some weird carved out fate of like what you are going to be. When you fuck with people's when you give people the ability to edit someone's genes like that, you are attempting to fuck with their free will in a way, because you don't do that without some sort of goal in mind, without some sort of goal for your child in mind.
And it doesn't matter if that goal is well intentioned, because you're not there to control your child, to fully control who they become. You're there to, support them. You're there to make sure that they get through their childhood alive and relatively safe and happy, right? Your goal should not be, I want my child to be the nicest person ever, or I want my child to be a top tier scientist, or I want my child to be exactly like me. It should be, I want my child to be whoever they want to be, and I want them to be happy with themselves. Because that's supporting the free will aspect. And anything else, no matter how well intentioned it is, that contradicts their free will. And like I'm I can speak to the wanting your child to be a nice person thing myself, because I was very much a sponge as a kid. Like I would pick up on what people expressed good or badly about me, like their opinion of me, very easily, and I kind of unconsciously tried to make those things a core part of myself as I grew up. And one of the things that became like sort of like feedback loop was being nice. And because as when I was a kid, I was one of those kids that would like run up to people and give them compliments and hugs, even though they were complete strangers. The whole
Same.
stranger danger thing never registered with me. My sister stole all of the stranger danger brain cells because she was very shy. But I just had no sense of danger. I would wander off and start talking to people like they were my best friends, and I'd only know them for like 5 minutes. But I, and so people would always tell me, "Oh, you're so nice," or "Oh," they would tell my mom like, "Oh, your daughter is so kind and sweet," and I would internalize that, and it got to the point where I genuinely didn't know if I was actually being nice anymore or if I was just continuing to perform what other people expected of me, and I didn't know how to genuinely be nice or how to stand up for myself or put down my own boundaries. So just that one part mentally, one part that was never intended, that was supposed to be a compliment, something to make somebody's day, that one little thing fucked me up. So imagine if you go to that level with genetics, you're not going to escape the consequences of crossing that threshold of controlling someone else's free will. Sorry, you're not going to come back from that, because even if you meant well with it, it's going to backfire in one way or another. And your kid, the one you tried to, do the good things for, they're going to suffer for it, you know?
Admittedly, like first order, but yeah. So one of the things that I think it worthy to say is that there's no way to address like systemic injustice through one policy decision. So if we were to say something, if whatever way we come down on the issue of sort of genetic conformism, I guess, I don't know, in utero conformity to cultural expectations, etc. That will have some ramifications that are unjust for at least some people, because it's only ever going to be like one policy decision, right? Likewise, if we have things like special education and sort of like behavior analysis available to like autistic kids, right? That has an upshot because though they still exist in a system where things like the availability of resources is unequal across people, and the quality of education and stuff is unequal across communities. So we're never going to like get the right answer here. Like there's no like policy decision that's going to be the right one. The one sort of last thing that I will say, like from my own side, is that kind of anything we do has ramifications like that. Any change of material conditions we propagate will have the effect that it influences what decision-making options people have later on, right? So if that's, whether that's like leaving a child, leaving a gestated egg to develop genetically as it's going to, that's going to have ramifications. It's going to compromise free will in some meaningful way, because the way your body gets built affects what you are able to do later on. Same is true if we go the route of designer babies and stuff. So yeah, that's one thing to bear in mind. Like there's never a right answer per minimizing. I don't know. Maybe there's a right answer in terms of minimizing suffering, but there's very little way of predicting what that answer will be, and it's never going to be like synthesizable into one single like policy decision. So that's worth keeping in mind as we keep on keeping on with this discourse. And that's one of the things I want to say to the audience as well, is like, don't let it stop at the podcast. You can keep talking about the ethics of parenting, keep talking about the ethics of disability, about the autistic sort of experience under capitalism and under public policy, etc. And that's so. Yeah. Unfortunately, it is getting to the point where we want to start winding down. We took it in interesting directions. The direction that suggests that we could go on for hours and hours and never stop. But that's why I don't want it to stop. So yeah. Last thing I'll say is that again, this episode was sort of a way of platforming people who are on the spectrum, who have those experiences to be sharing about, and interesting takeaways abound. And it's also a way of like plugging Shock and Autism as another bit of like media and another media outlet that you can, as the audience, like go to if you want to continue to be part of the sort of project of getting more disabled voices out there in the world and having an impact. Is there anything that our like featured guests want to say to like to the audience, to the effect of like of the end of the episode, or to about the podcast, etc.?
Just thank you for listening. Thank you for having us on. Like William said, we are Shock and Autism. You can find us that on Instagram. You can search us up on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast for our regular weekly podcast. We also do YouTube videos. We got a gaming channel, Shock and Autism Plays. We got a regular miscellaneous goofy nonsense channel that makes us laugh and stuff. And also be on the lookout, because there's this isn't the end of the collaborations. It probably won't be till July, but we've had William on before. We'd love to have William and or other guests on there if that can be arranged sort of on the other end. Shock and Autism is a bit more I don't know how would you say it, Dylan? A bit less like
More
serious.
random.
Yeah, random. A bit more random, a bit less reverent than this. But it was nice to come in and be a tinge more serious in some public outlet. And then thank you for allowing us to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, if you ever caught yourself thinking, I wish this, Through Our Lens were fun. Like I wish it were about fun things. Shock and Autism is for you.
I thought we were
William.
chaotic, so I can't imagine how chaotic it must be on your end. So I'm gonna look you guys up, start listening.
All right. Well, yeah. Again. Oh, sorry, Dylan. Did you have any final words for the listeners?
I think
Yours.
Daniel pretty much summed up everything I would have wanted to say too. I guess if I had anything left to say on the topic, it would just be I wish people weren't so like immediately and almost instinctually judgmental of others. Like I feel like I like, for instance, I mean, just to make the example personal again, as you can probably tell, I stutter a lot, I stumble a lot, I don't speak very deeply into things, but I don't think that should be reflective of me as a person. It's just one facet of me, and I just, it's frustrating to be judged on just a single facet of yourself. So that all I just want to say is like, be kind to people. You don't know, like it's probably said over and over and over again, but you don't know what other people are going through, and just bear that in mind in your day-to-day, every minute of everyday communication. That's my philosophy anyway. See, I turned it back into philosophy. Daniel, you happy?
Elated. My nipples are hard, Dylan. That's how happy I am.
As our final last but not least guest host, Keelan, do you have any final words for the nice people at home?
Not much, other than thanks for having me on. This was great. I would say that I was surprised that we delved off the topic of autism so much, but then again, most of us are neurodivergent. I'm also ADHD. It do be.
It'd be like that sometimes.
It'd be
right?
like that.
It be like that most times, even.
There you go. So yeah. And okay. Presuming there's no other like business to get out of the way, on behalf of Dana, I'll say a few things. First, keep the conversation going. We are better off together than we are individually, almost in all cases. Hashtag where's the ramp? Hashtag we're good at podcasting. Thank you, everybody, and good day. You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a podcast that centers on disability with the hopes of uplifting, informing, and bringing together disabled people and their allies. If you'd like to join Dana in the conversation, head to the description to check out our link tree and find us on Instagram at DANA at Sac State. Hashtag where's the ramp? Hashtag we're good at podcasting.